So I want to talk about adults in moral injury, uh, and I'm gonna say all adults have moral injury, and that is part of being an adult. So I just got out of the shower, you know, was trying to slow myself down enough. I mean, I hope my wet hair doesn't get in the keyboard, but yeah. So I want to talk about this. I think it's really important. All right, so I have only ever um, heard that term, if I want to call it that, from one a person, an adult, a man that was celebrated as anti-war years ago, but he's not anti-war. And it took me over 6 years of writing to him for him to finally communicate something to where I could see that completely clearly. I kind of knew that before he wrote what he wrote, and then I was like, I mean, not only are you not anti-war, you condone brutality, and there's some mess, and I don't know what's gonna stop it. And he's not a good person, and I'm gonna say with him, my feeling was he's using moral injury as an excuse, and I'm gonna ask this question: can a person use the idea of moral injury, and also sometimes maybe there's a not a conscious process that goes on to do more harm, using that as an and that what comes to mind when I say that is some kind of villain and in an old novel, I think it's that bad. I really do. All right, so, but what I want to say is that if there is such a thing as moral injury, all adults have it. And I'm thinking about this and thinking about what's going on right now, and I'm thinking about the way that people feel can become debilitated by emotions having to do with that. So I'm going to kind of use this as an example. I don't want to say that word. I kind of want to use it as a way to compare a process, maybe, and differences, and are there any similarities? But I think about when the massacre happened in this elementary school in Uvalde, and I was on LinkedIn at the time, and there were people being real critical of law enforcement for not getting there in time to stop it. And one of my thoughts is about, well, first of all, I mean, I don't think any of them worked in law enforcement, but and this was a few years ago. I've been off since I've been off for 3 years. Got on briefly, but no, it's aggressive. But and I was aggressed on for kind of defending the law enforcement officers and them not getting there in time to stop it. When you were confronted with horror, and it's immediate horror, I really think there's something in us that can slow us down because it's so hard to imagine, and stress probably goes real high. So there are things that I think might impede a person's physical ability to respond, at least somewhat. And also whatever was going on there. I mean, it's it was very likely past the point of being able to be to be stopped. I mean, so yeah, and so um but blaming law enforcement for not getting there in time is, I want to say that's kind of ignorant. All right, so I don't think it's helpful. All right, so and I do not have children, and I am not in the classroom, and yeah, I mean, I could talk about being at a school, being at the high school that Kenny Chesney graduated from and Morgan Wallen graduated from, substituting one day as a teacher assistant, I think, in a self-contained special education room, and there was a active shooter drill, and the kids were terrified, and that isn't okay. And probably even in a non-special education room, there are emotions, even if kids don't show it, and those things can become physical, stomach aches, bad dreams, different things like that. Bad dreams, I always pay attention. I have said that before, nightmares, but there's that stress. So anyway, yeah. Well, I kind of wanted to compare that slowing down. If there was a slowing down process, this is horrific. And I think again, the mind might have a hard time sort of processing something that is of really high magnitude horror. if I think about the flooding in the mountains, and there was no way people could be prepared for it because it was that bad. All right, so there were people who had done things to prepare for a flood, but it wasn't enough. It was that bad. All right, so thinking about what is going on now, and thinking about adults, and thinking about if there is such a thing as moral injury, and thinking about that, there being these things that slow people down, and actually could even sort of turn a person's conscience off, at least somewhat. And maybe that's part of moral injury, and maybe that's part of what adults do to kind of do the day-to-day thing. I mean, adults, a lot of adults, we're humans, and we're in physical bodies, and we're alive, and we have to stay alive. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I think about my old friend whose grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, and then him being a human shield in Honduras, and being abducted by guerrillas, and being in a place for 3 months and not knowing the whole time if he was going to be killed. All right. Now, when I think about him, and I could be wrong, but I think he's pretty sensitive. All right, so if I think about him, and I think about what's going on right now, and I think about these kind of, moral dilemma are the words that come to mind, but it's like, all right, I mean, I don't even want to exist because I feel so much conflict. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor, but is my existence doing harm? I can't seem to stop what's going on that is so harmful. I that kind of thing can really push a person in a direction that is not good for their physical health. It can cause a person to, I'm not saying he is experiencing this because we haven't communicated in over 20 years, but, feeling like they're having a breakdown, a mental breakdown, it can make a person feel suicidal. There are many things that, and also thinking about food. I know, all right, so, because there are people who, I mean, we're alive, we have to eat. People have different ways of saying prayers, and also doing things, and again, we're alive, and we have to eat. We have to stay alive. And these things that have been going on have an impact on our physical health. But, thinking about a person could get to the point where they don't want to eat because they feel so much guilt about what people are being put through. A person could, again, get suicidal because they feel so much guilt about what humans are being put through. And some people are never going to change because that's just the way they are. But I think about, there may be plenty of adults where people get used to doing things a certain way, and when harmful things are happening to people and they're not directly affected, they might just think, all right, well, and I have concerns that that's going on. I mean, maybe it always goes on. Maybe it's always going on some. But again, I think all adults, if there's such a thing as moral injury, I think all adults have it. I think that is part of becoming an adult. You do things, and some things are benign and not harmful and normative. Other things are harmful, and then you learn what, okay, I don't want to do that again. And so I think, could a person say that moral injury is part of becoming an adult? But it's really important to not be crippled by that, if that is a thing. And it's also important not to use it as an excuse. And I can't imagine that most people do, but I do think that the person that I described seemed to be using it as an excuse. And if a person uses that to do more harm, then that person, I'm going to say, if there is such a thing as mental illness, is that mental illness? What is that exactly? I don't know what that is. I just think, wow. I mean, that's an aggressive man. All right, but yeah. So, but again, thinking about, something comes to mind about the way things can be defined with sort of different social parameters, different things, thinking about history. Well, again, there are things that we learn not to do, and sometimes people end up in prison because they've done something, and sometimes a person gains an awareness of the impact, and sometimes a person doesn't. And plenty of the time, people are in prison because of generational oppression. All right, so there is a whole issue too. But I just wanted to talk about that. I think all adults, I think a feature of being an adult is if there is such a thing as moral injury, I think it's that. I mean, we put gas in the car, gas is not renewable. Well, lithium in batteries is taken from places that need to be protected. I mean, there are all these things that are day to day, and yeah, so I think, again, that's part of being an adult. But I think that it can be an obstacle to people acting, to people doing something when something needs to be done. And I think perhaps adults get so used to certain things, in, in a person's life that they don't see it. I could say that could be a risk to that person because under a brutal dictatorship, that person could eventually become a target too. And a person might not think they could ever become a target, but a person could because a brutal dictatorship doesn't make any sense. Abuse doesn't make sense. It's hard to explain it. It's hard to understand it. It's hard to talk about it. So anyhow, I hope that what I'm saying kind of, what I hope is that I pray that people, I really do, there does need to be a group of scrappy ass medical doctors that starts to speak out, and I know there have to be people like that out there. And if I were a medical doctor, well, I mean, I don't know, I really didn't want to go to medical school because I knew if I was told to do something and I didn't feel good about it, then I wouldn't want to do it. So that for me, it's like there's no way. And where I went to the medical school interview, there was a hallway to a VA, and it's like, that's not good. Medical students going and doing whatever to veterans. I mean, veterans being used again. I don't fucking think so. So yeah, if people would listen to me more, would it make a difference? Does it make a difference? I hope. I really appreciate when people listen to me, but that's what we need, some scrappy ass medical doctors to say this, what is going on is harmful to people on a real basic level. Health, and how many years has this all been going on? There are always things going on in this country. I could say in the world, but in this country. But the past 10 years with it being worse and worse, I am not going to say we should learn from it, though that's true. We can learn from it. But I mean, for it to get to the point that it is, people are being killed, people are being brutalized. So I think, it's just more important to stop it. So anyhow, well, just a few words about adults and moral injury, if there is such a thing as moral injury. And that's what I think about that.